My name is Zhyldyz Tegizbekova. First of all, I'm one of the experts and instructors in the training center of the Agency on Personal Data under the Cabinet of Ministers of the Kyrgyz Republic. Within our training center, there are offline courses. I can send you a link. It was established just 2 years ago, but we have lots of trainees already, and prices are minimum. So this is for those who are interested in offline courses. We have a course on cybersecurity, data analysts, digital skills, digital rights, lots of courses, and also master classes on cyber hygiene. Many master classes are absolutely free of charge. So this is aspect number one. If you have questions, of course, I cannot answer many on of them on behalf of the agency, like the one by Olan, but I will try to answer them. I also work in the International University Alato in Kyrgyzstan. Also, I have been working in Kazakhstan for several years in Narikbay's University on digital rights and also digital rights of human being in Demirel's University. So I teach two courses, cyber rights and human rights. I cannot say that I will answer all the questions, but I will try to extent possible. I would like to start my topic. And first, I would like to thank the previous speaker who has made a very good overview on the international standards of personal data protection. Therefore, I can proceed with the discussion on the local context of the Kyrgyz Republic. If we speak about our reality here, I would like to follow the thought voiced by Gulmira Isaevna. You mentioned that, yes, in Europe there are certain values, but in this region the values are different. And every time we discuss personal data protection with my colleagues, one of my colleagues is in Portugal, and the discussion is such whether there are regional standards on the protection of personal data. Every time our discussion boils down to the following. Personal data protection originated much earlier than IT technology. This is quite a deep topic, and we need to elaborate our standards on this topic. You mentioned that in Europe there are certain values. We also have our certain values, and those things that are categorized as personal data for Europeans are not always such in Central Asia. We need to take a look at the anthropology in general. Both in Kyrgyzstan and Kazakhstan, such questions as how old are you, whether you're married or not, how many children do you have, how much do you earn. When such questions are asked, we can openly answer them. But in Europe, there is a different culture, and such questions are never asked. But in our culture, you can immediately ask for answer, how old are you and where you come from. It's okay. So you see, the perception of personal data is dramatically different. This is if we speak about the social aspect of personal data in general. But the situation currently is such that we collect personal data, they get processed, they get stored, how it is done and how it affects other human rights of ours. It is already quite a topical question. As a matter of fact, sometimes we don't understand how threatening it can be to us if there is a leakage of our personal data. And I would like to ask a question to everyone. You can answer in the chat. The first quarter of this year, according to the statistical data of EU, just in Europe, only 15% of people felt that they had a full control over the information that they leave in internet. It is interesting to find out about our citizens' opinion. What about our citizens? How many of them feel that the information which is sent through internet is under their control? I think I find it difficult to answer myself because, again, we have the difference. If the disclosure of certain personal data is always a question somewhere else, but here, even by WhatsApp, we can send our passport details or whatever. We can send freely all the information, and we never think that it can be a problem. But you can ask yourself how many times you have sent your copy of passport through Telegram or WhatsApp to sign a contract or legalize or register your per diem or whatever. But maybe the WhatsApp of the person who is your recipient can be broken, and then the leakage can happen at his or her fault, not at your fault. Therefore, such questions are quite topical. I also read the course on cyber hygiene. Vyacheslav has written in the chat about cyber fraud. It's a very sore point nowadays in this country. I can show you very specific examples what kind of phishing and cyber fraud happens in this country. In Kazakhstan, it happens as well, but in Kazakhstan, they make analysis of all these cyber crimes, but in Kyrgyzstan, we don't have this open analysis. We can just get it through confidential channel through the Center of Cyber Regional Attacks under the National Security Agency. If we speak about digital human rights, other types of digital rights exist, and these are also very sore points. For example, today we are discussing a draft law on the protection of minors' rights in the internet space. The basic rights are numerous. What is personal data? When we ask this question, even to the citizens, you can see the results of a survey made by one of my students last year. 80 respondents took part in her survey, and the question was what personal data is. It's not that easy to answer the question immediately, but in general, this is what relates to us. Am I name, surname, personal data? What about my phone number? Is it personal data or not? If we take a general look, not a legal look, you can see the list: name, passport data. This is the majority response. Then we have email, family social status, number of phone, personal identification number, and so on and so forth. What about the story of internet shopping? Will it be personal data or not? This is another question. And I can see already questions coming to the chat. You're most welcome. Are there any punishment measures? Yes, there are, but we need to clarify which information you mean. Is it just personal data leaking or information like pornography or whatever? Here you need to clarify, Dinara. Okay, personal data. In the administrative code, we have the fine of 20,000 soms for the illegal storage of personal data. Of course, it's very little. In the criminal code, we have a whole chapter devoted to computer crime, because leakage is also quite a broad concept. It can be a blockage of personal data. For example, the employer blocked all personal data of their employees. And from my practice, I know that a criminal case has been investigated on cyber sabotage. It was quite a resonance case, but it wasn't just about personal data, because there was no specific article in the law. Now in the agenda, we have the following question. We are to modify our legislation to strengthen this aspect, this punishment for the leakage of personal data. Do we need to notify the subject of the personal data that your personal data has leaked? Yes, you should. And European standards are most necessary here in terms of studying which penalties are used. What about European agencies? How do they protect personal data and control them? This is a unique practice. Just yesterday, if you saw, there was the news that EU penalized TikTok for $225 million. Though I may be wrong, but it's a big money for the dissemination of personal data of the minors. This is an example. We don't have such amounts, and there is a cool question about the record of this webinar. When, for example, someone says that we're going to share the video records. My personal authorization hasn't been taken. Already you have your personal data here. When Zoom records happen, in educational institutions, I don't allow storing the records of some of my master classes, for example, about how you can file a complaint against law enforcement bodies after the events of January and December in Kazakhstan, because we speak about national things, and if it reaches someone, I can have a problem. So it is your decision. Will you agree to share the video record where you are or not? But this is just a digression. Of course, I will authorize sharing the records of this webinar because this is for educational purposes. And what personal data protection is quite a topical area for educational institutions and organizations that work with the data of others. I can see anti-AIDS organization, they have quite sensitive data, and of course they need to properly protect them. I cannot read all the questions. Let's proceed further with the presentation. What is personal data? If you take a further look, we can refer many things like PIN codes, surname, family name, and the eye print, fingerprint, and all this biometric data in theory should belong to the concept of personal data in general. I'm not speaking about legal aspects, but in general. But our situation in Kyrgyzstan is quite unique because biometric data are regulated by the State Registration Service provisions and other regulatory acts, not by the law on personal data. In theory, it's quite clear that personal data should encompass the eye print, voice, and so on and so forth. But in our legislation, there is some kind of a misunderstanding. I think you remember that there were elections and we were all forced to give our biometric data for the transparency of elections, and it happened in such a way that State Registration Service started collecting data, but the Personal Data Agency was created just several years ago, and there is some chaos about that. Of course, public agencies will not be happy to hear that, but this is my personal opinion. Everything should be properly merged, consolidated, and it should belong to the competence of one public agency, both the personal data and biometric data. Also, here we can refer DNA, somehow genetic parts of our body. It all belongs to personal data. Passwords, nationality, ethnicity, many things can belong to personal data, as well as habits and so on and so forth. Let's go further. This is specially protected personal data. And there is a question from Svetlana. I can see many people online. We know each other in person, and I can speak to you after the presentation. Especially protected personal data are sensitive data in accordance with our legislation. This is like race, nationality, political views. For example, I fully agree with Ulan, and it doesn't refer to banking services, but also to them as well. Why do you need to give the data about the monthly salary of a parent when your child goes to school? Before, schools used to collect certain data which don't belong to the competence of schools. Why do they need to collect it? As regards specially protected data, it's data about health. Medical data of a human being are one of the most sore points, and within the Personal Data Agency, we already have had cases when there were inspections on medical institutions and laboratories, because it was that easy. Even in Bonetsky laboratory, you could enter any code, any number, and you can see the analysis of someone. So this is the wrong storage of personal data. But now situation is changing, and I would like to make another comment why some organizations require so much data. It should be at the national control. This is the obligation of the government. I think I have seen just these specifics in our constitution. that the government has to protect the personal data. This is quite unusual. So this function of governmental control should exist, and the one has to bring into compliance all these processes of personal data collection. This is one of the objectives of the Personal Data Agency in general. And when Olan was asking his question, why they collect so much data, there are articles in the law on personal data which indicate that collection of personal data should match the objectives of the relevant activity. If some information doesn't belong to the banking transaction, then the citizen can complain to the personal data agency. Now this agency can react only upon complaints, and then the agency can come with the inspection to a particular bank. I think I will try and answer the questions because my presentation is big and the time is short. There is another live situation when the doctor
данных пациентов через любую
health
учетную
workers had access to patients' data through any account. You may ask why be so concerned about that. They are medical staff, but if a person is registered with the psychologist, only psychologist should have access to this records. My master students from neighboring countries also told me other stories. In health clinic, young guys, workers can read records of beautiful patients. This is quite an outrageous situation. And if we give this example of personal data protection need, because you see other people can use this health data for their personal needs, and this is of course wrong. Also, what are the cases when the patient's rights are violated? It is intolerable. For that purpose, there are local national standards that should be observed by both public and private institutions. So if there are some records and accounts, relevant requirements should be met. As regards examples of personal data collection, you can see that at Play Market, at different trade portals, you can give your information. And at schools, they also collect lots of data. I think a couple of years ago, I received an SMS from the assistant of my school children, and she asked me to send my personal tax number and other data. I started asking why, and of course, in school, no one can answer me. I was sent an internal order of the Ministry of Education that school children profiles should be created, and for that purpose, this information should be collected, but digital profiling of a school child is not allowed according to our legislation. There is already the contradiction and violation. That's why provision of this data is something that shouldn't take place at all. So for the schools and universities and ministries to know about that, one has to make more and more information campaigns saying what personal data is, how to collect them, and what kind of type of personal data collection is legitimate, and what kind of approach is not legitimate, and how they are processed and stored, because storing personal data is also one big problem, and we are all facing it. For example, at universities, before we had the cases in Kyrgyzstan when the student would enter the university indicating the name, surname, which school has graduated, and the score in the National Republican test. Now it doesn't happen. But there is another case when public authorities collect lots of personal data. And there is a question whether there is the authorized or non-authorized access to this personal data. Then discount cards. When you go to a cafe, of course, they give you a whole spreadsheet I need to sign, and they will give me a discount. And I remember myself giving some kind of explanation to the management of some coffee shops. I asked why they were collecting this data. Okay, I want to have this discount, but I saw 35 people who have registered before me. I would insert my data and someone else would see that. And it was quite a big amount of personal information. And this is absolutely wrong, but it happens not because people want to violate the law, but because they don't know that such laws exist. What uh, do public agencies know about the citizens? Lots of data are kept there. There are special databases of public authorities like Tunduk.
So, for instance, sometimes we come to government agencies and also provide copies of our documents. We are going through digitalization. All our data is digitalized. You can enter the portal to see your property, what car is registered to your name. So through your personal cabinet, you can see all the information about yourself. Certain authorities can also have access to this information when, in addition to digital records, they also require copies of your passports. My question is why? What for? It would need to be changed in the future. They already have your data in an electronic form. In Kazakhstan, in Zhyldyz, they are currently discussing to prohibit collection of copies of documents because there is an e-gov system. Commercial organizations also know a lot about us. For instance, travel companies, aviation companies, Wildberries, or other companies that work inside Kyrgyzstan and beyond the boundaries. They know a lot about us, the history of visiting different websites and resources, history of purchases, and then to them it helps to do targeted advertising. For instance, if Google knows this history of my travel, it calculates and sends me targeted advertising with prices, destinations, and so on. All that is being used for mass advertising and marketing campaigns, and therefore data is sold and purchased. The serious question is how this data is being stored. Because, for instance, if a company is hacked and all the information leaks, what happens? What should happen then? Who should be notified? For instance, in January this year, more than 1 million records have been leaked from Mail.ru, and data of more than 500,000 Kazakhstani citizens leaked into darknet. What kind of punitive measures, what kind of punishment was imposed on Mail.ru? Big question. Roskomnadzor started the investigation on that, but we do not know the result yet. Sometimes data collection starts not to discredit, and sometimes CVs are being published on the website of different organizations, and CVs contain a lot of personal data, married, not married, and all the information is sometimes just included into the CVs, and employers sometimes publish the entire text of the CV without sorting any fields. Would that violate your right or not? So if the job contract, your job contract confirms that you give consent to process and use your personal data, that's one thing. But if your CV also includes some medical data, such as blood rhesus factor or blood type, you would need to also provide consent to share specially protected data. Dinara, I'm reading your last question, and honestly, I cannot answer this. The question is whether it's true that in Kazakhstan, internet does monitoring and follows everyone. And frankly speaking, she says, your mobile phone contains a report about your movements and directions over the past 3 months with the full report of your geolocation and the timing that you've spent in different locations. So when we ask what government body can trace your whereabouts, anyone can do it. It's also a question of what we mean by surveillance. Your mobile phones do that, and you need to do proper settings to stop that from happening. What do I mean by data collection? There are different sources of data, and sometimes we have state databases, and the government protects their data. Have there been any leaks of data from state databases? There were some open cases where personal data was collected on a flash drive, and then some of the flashes were stolen. So there were the cases. ALGA is one organization in Kazakhstan that does investigations of personal data leakages. There had been cases before, and not only in our country. Another question is whether there have been any leaks from the commercial databases. In Almaty, there was a forum on IT technology recently, and over the past 3 years, ALGA identified 3 large leakages from the higher educational institutions in Kazakhstan. How can I gather social data? From social networks. For instance, if Facebook account was broken into, how does that happen? Sometimes we ourselves publish open things, and on Facebook, sometimes information about your date of birth, your place of residence, and then you target who your mother's fathers are, and so on and so on. How can somebody break into your account? Well, many of our passwords still have our first and last name and date of birth. Where can people get this information? From your social network profile. There is an application where you can put that information, and certain approximate passwords can be generated that people can use. So when we use social networks, we put a lot of information into there, and there are general search systems or thematic databases. For instance, if you are part of a chess society, then your data would be included there with your ratings and so on and so forth. They would be published on that website. So we share a lot of information and various open resources. There are questions about how we can search information. I've looked about some people who is who through AI instruments, and it's not GPT chat. There are other tools, and there are open website, for instance, perplexity.ai, where you can just put first and last name and find many details, whether that person was involved in any of the political scandals, criminal cases. Even digital CV of an individual can be done through this database. So the question about storage, personal data storage, is very topical. So these are the sources for data, and there are other tools which we usually share during our master classes. And by using those tools, you can check on anyone, even those people who are not on social media, they do not use internet. There are very, very few people like that, and it's difficult to get information on those people. Even for me, I spent more than 14 hours per day on internet. I'm working online all the time from 8 a.m. to 9 p.m. And clearly I leave digital footprint based on which people can detect who am I and collect a lot of the information. So digital profiling is very important. And now to hire an individual, there is no need to even go through a CV. It's very easy to obtain information about yourselves through search engines. Some of these search engines and systems should be prohibited. In Kyrgyzstan, for instance, in Russia, LinkedIn wanted to prohibit use of that system because it shares a lot of personal data. So many search systems should be closed down because they violate our own norms on data procedure. So for instance, get contact application. It's a vivid example of violating the legislation. So even if you download this app, you can find nicknames and a lot of other private information. Let's look at some of the examples in Kyrgyzstan. Of course, there are lots of phishing attacks, and even under the official information that Lalafo has shared, Lalafo has some representatives from Moldova and other countries. Why? Because our society is very naive, very kind. For instance, if somebody asks us to share information, we do that. So for instance, somebody asks, oh, can you share your banking information? I don't have money and I'll send you the data later. So people who got registered on Lala4 got hooked up. So it's a very good open field to do this study on phishing attacks. So lots of leakages happen there based on the victims sharing the information. And then faked vacancies. Sometimes you just look at the salary, $5,000, and you make an application and sending all the documents, copies of passports without even checking whether that organization exists or whether that website belongs to the existing organization. And sometimes we think, so what? I've just sent my information, no problem. Well, in the past, we had an option to get an online loan. So in the agency, Personal Data Protection Agency, there's been a complaint where a lady had a phone call from an online credit company about repayment of the a loan. And a lady never made any loan application with involvement of law enforcement authorities. Some prisoners obtained copies of passport and applied for a loan. In WhatsApp, it's very often for us to have and keep copies of passports. So those copies of passports were used to get a loan, an online loan. So victims can be any of us simply because we've shared copies of our passports 5 years ago with somebody. There are lots of fraudulent phone calls, for instance, on behalf of Gazprom, notifying that you won a competition and a tax inspection wants to give you a car as a present. And many people do that, but sometimes they are concerned about sharing that information with their friends and family members that they got hooked up. So if in the past there were calls from males, now there are many females who are making such phone calls. So also now there are new technologies that can falsify voice. For instance, a certain voice message could be sent from a phone that was broken into. Developed states have already experienced that, and God forbid it happens here. For instance, your child telephones you with a really worried voice saying, Mom, I need whatever, 500,000 soms to be transferred to 5,000 soms to be transferred. So these code words that you come up with can protect you in an offline mode. In Kyrgyzstan, I don't have any statistics about fraudulent phone calls, but in Kazakhstan, based on the official data of Cyberpol, 17,500 cyber fraudulent operations had taken place, and more than half of them were so-called wishings, the fraudulent phone calls, to try get a certain amount of money. A month ago, 6 guys fooled people in Almaty Oblast. So we have to be prudent ourselves working in an online facility. Another phishing on the topic of private mobilization. So I don't know how many of you wanted to use this QR code. God forbid somebody broken into my account, which I use for presentation purposes. Usually for such websites, we don't come up with a very difficult website. So for instance, somebody got into my account on Prezi website, which I use for presentations, placed that QR code, and people that attend my presentations and online courses could have just entered the QR code and leave the personal data. So for some website, we create very strong passwords, but for some website, we don't really take enough time to create very strong passwords. So for instance, this QR code on the screen that you can see, it's a questionnaire. It tells you that if you want to learn more about phishing information on Kyrgyzstan, you need to make an application. But to be honest, even when we do such trainings, 5 participants or so fill out such a questionnaire and share their personal data. So my advice to you is to be careful with such QR codes. Right now, commodity is not just gold, diamonds, or money. Our personal data is a commodity. And one of the objectives of cybercrime, cyber criminals, is to obtain personal data. During COVID pandemic, I've had requests from companies requesting legal assistance and legal advice about certain local companies being hacked with the client database being blocked. So there are questions from those companies of what to do in such situations. But that's a legal matter that requires investigation. However, to take some preventive measures, what's important is to conduct awareness campaigns on cyber hygiene. Wherever I go and whatever I do, I try to introduce aspect of cyber hygiene, because if you yourself is protected and your company is more protected, then there'll be fewer attacks on your profile, on your company, and that will reduce the chances of you becoming subjects of cyber crimes. Every government body and every private company needs to have a protocol on cybersecurity. The highest vulnerability now is a human being, and human beings are the reasons themselves for data leakages and for the leakages of information and data about the entire company. And there could be consequences for citizens, for business, for operators, for the company as a whole. For instance, if your personal correspondence floats somewhere on the internet, it's not very nice. It's not present. It can be dangerous. So if you use somebody else's computer, please go through an incognito profile and then close it down properly. Also, if you are somewhere in a public place and at the conference, and we all start searching for free Wi-Fi, even if you have unlimited internet access on the phone, we still have a habit of searching for free Wi-Fi. Honestly, mobile internet is not so costly. Rather than using free Wi-Fi, you better use the internet provided by your mobile operator. That's much safer And there are lots of things that our citizens are not doing simply because of their naivety, our mentality, lack all awareness. So if they see somebody else's flash drive, we want to check that, not just to steal it, but to find the owner and pass it back to the owner. But there are some examples of training attacks. For instance, when flash drives are being left to see who will come and use it. And many still do that. Many still open those flash drives just to find the owner of that flash drive. So that's part of our mentality. We're very kind and very naive people, but we have to be prudent and we need to teach people about that.
There was a case of safe city, smart city. There were several cases when the leakage was about PCR tests. Such cases were registered in Kyrgyzstan, in terms of Kazakhstan, and Uzbekistan, India, and other countries. Yes, such leakages have happened, and they do happen every time. And do I have some time left? And here we have a question. Who is supposed to deal with the personal data protection? And from our survey, there is another set of responses. Out of 80 respondents, the majority thinks that this should be the function of the government, and a small proportion thinks that it should be the civil society. In theory, the purple color should prevail because it is everyone, because this is the digital society in general. So if you keep everything in a super manner, if the same refers to public agencies, if everything is kept properly, then a new person comes and your data leaks due to the fault of the staff member, and the government is also affected because it also seems to violate the policy of personal data protection. Have there been cases of personal data leakage in centers of citizens servicing? There was a client's case when the leakage happened at the fault of the employee. Unfortunately, the complaint wasn't filed officially because the client refused categorically, but there were very difficult cases, so such leakages did happen. So 83% is quite the correct answer from the legal point of view. This is the government, but we shouldn't always think that the government always protects us. We also need to think about that. If we speak about the regulatory framework of personal data protection, Article 63 of the Kyrgyz Constitution has quite an interesting wording that the government guarantees personal data protection to everyone. But what about implementation? This is a different question. There are other articles that which better fit. So this is Article 10 about digital and information security. Article 29 is about the privacy protection, confidentiality of our personal life, correspondence. All these articles apply there. So the Constitution does protect our personal data. And if to be more exact, we have the law about the personal information dated 2008. This is quite old law. That time I was working in the area of aviation. I wasn't aware of that law. That's my fault, but we didn't use this law. And it is my opinion that recently it has started its implementation in practice. It requires some improvement, but the most important fact is that it exists. Also, there were resolutions of the government dated 2017. This is the requirement to ensure safety of personal data when they are processed in information systems. What are the levels of personal data protection depending on the level? For example, if these are data for companies, for commercial, for public agencies, it is an important thing for them to understand the resolution. It seems quite difficult in terms of language, but there are useful requirements. Also, there are agencies, regulatory acts, which contain comments to that resolution. I was involved in the preparation of them. They're quite difficult as well because they refer to the technical aspects of the personal data protection, going into such details as in which cabinets they should be stored, what kind of bars and doors we need to have there. So these are purely technical details, but these rules do exist, and everything is published on the website of the Personal Data Agency. If we take a look at what personal information is, we can see that the burden is very heavy and difficult in our legislation if we are to compare with Kazakh and Russian legislation. This is quite a big definition, quite cumbersome, and many questions are controversial here, but the most important thing is that it exists. I think the most interesting part for you will be whether the government has been working in this area. Indeed, the government has to protect us, yes, but the agency has been established just recently. There are very few staff members. For me, this agency is like a digital ombudsman, but the number of staff is very limited. And this is the statistics for the past year. This year, we already have many reviewed cases. The statements of opinion were given on the basis of the interrogation of public, private entities, natural persons, individuals. So this is the number of incidents. Number 15 is the number of legislative acts. This is 207 registered legal entities in the roster. Now it is more than 1,000 information campaigns and trainings have been delivered. Video reels are short. Someone asked about offline courses. There is ofu.tpa.pg. This is the website where such information work happens. These are the examples that I have already given to you. This is a person in Tokmak who took a loan using someone else's personal data through online. Please remember who you send the personal data, like copy of passport. This is for your safety to delete it from Telegram, because copies of passports can make an evil joke with you. And I'm afraid myself now, because I have sent so many copies of passport now, I try to send it in the Word document, and I send just those data which are necessary for contract signing and nothing else. And when it comes to signing, then I bring the paper-based copy to the relevant organization. This can be done. Who collects personal data? According to Article 30 of the law on personal data, there was supposed to be created a roster of holders of personal data, massive. Many people can ask why it is required, why we need to register, but this is the legal requirement. This is our answer. More than 1,000 organizations have been registered already. I checked Alato University in that roster. This is quite a big holder of the massive of personal data. And the same refers to other organizations like yours. Please take a look whether your organization is there. If you deal with the collection and processing of personal data, if all the more you have to keep them, then you have to register in this roster of data keepers. It is very important. How to arrange that? At the website of the agency, you can find a detailed instruction. If you don't understand something, you can make a phone call and get consultation. So there is the hotline, not only for public agencies, but for commercial institutions and banking institutions. So it's very important indeed. Also, questions were asked about Facebook. Just imagine a person visits your page, and on avatar you see your photo, and all personal data of yours are indicated. If you see that your question is where to go and who to complain to, what can be done? Of course, many start having a question how I can prevent the usage of my personal information from manipulation or humiliation or harassment of myself in social media. There was a comment like people were writing on behalf of my friends, but I always refer to one and the same example to show a detailed picture. When at the border line, accounts of two people were broken, probably by Tajik hackers during that Kyrgyz-Tajik conflict, and lots of negative information was sent from those accounts. When the staff of Azatik interviewed those people, it was found that people hadn't been using that social media for 2 years, but it takes time to prove that you haven't been using. And if from your account there are appeals or calls for terrorist attack, you will be accused. So you need to follow the basics of cyber hygiene. Please study them and protect yourself up front. This is very important. You need to observe the cyber hygiene yourself rather than thinking who to wait for and who to refer to if your personal data is used without any unsanctioned access and with the unsanctioned access. And you need to go to the administration of the social media. This is the first step, but you do not always get the expected result. Number two, you need to refer to the Ministry of Interior because this is the function of our militia to protect us. You can say that this is a cyber crime, but this is their function. Why don't we have this Center for Cybercrime Investigation? This is a good question, but not to me. In Kazakhstan, it already exists. In spring this year, there were already 100 operational staff at that Kazakh center. Also, you can write to the Center of Response to Cyber Attacks at the National Security Committee if there are other leakages of personal data. And if you know that a company violates your rights and uses your personal data without your authorization, you can always refer with a complaint to the Personal Data Agency. Now they respond only on the basis of complaints from citizens, but this is another tool that you can use. And of course, I have a global question that can be asked to everyone. What are the problems with data protection in Kyrgyzstan? Personal data protection, please write down your opinion or voice it. We welcome all the opinions. Of course, I do have my own vision, and I have been helping the government and criticizing them, trying at the same time to make information campaigns. Now I'm working with the school children to a greater extent because the issue of cyber attack against children is quite a topical issue. This is my personal work that I'm doing. That's all from me. If you have any other questions, I'll be happy to answer.